Welcome, everyone, to episode 62 of Ohio Unsolved. I'm your host, Matthew, and in today's episode, we hear about the disappearance of Natalee Holloway. So let's just get right into the episode. Everyone, sit back, make sure to lock your doors and windows, and get ready for Ohio Unsolved. Natalee Ann Holloway, born October 21st, 1986, disappeared on May 30th, 2005. She was an 18-year-old American whose mysterious disappearance made international news after she vanished on May 30th near the end of a high school graduation trip to Aruba in the Caribbean. Natalee lived in Mountain Brook, Alabama, and graduated from Mountain Brook High School on May 24, 2005, just days before the trip. Her disappearance resulted in a media sensation in the United States. Her remains have not been found. Natalee was scheduled to fly home from the Caribbean island on May 30th, but she failed to appear for her flight. Her classmates last saw her outside of Carlos and Charlie's, a restaurant and nightclub in Oranjestad. She was in a car with local residents Joran Vandersloot and brothers Deepak and Satish Kalop. I'm sorry if I mispronounce these names. I'm sure I'm going to do that a lot. When the three men were questioned, they said that they dropped off Natalee at her hotel and denied knowing what had become of her. Upon further investigation by authorities, Vandersloot was arrested twice on suspicion of involvement in her disappearance, and the Kalops were each arrested 3 times. Due to lack of evidence, the 3 suspects were released each time without being charged with a crime. Natalee's parents criticized Aruban police for the lack of progress in the investigation and interrogation of the 3 men who were last seen with their daughter. The family also called for a boycott of Aruba, which gained then-Governor of Alabama Bob Riley's support, but failed to gain any widespread backing. With the assistance of hundreds of volunteers, Aruban investigators conducted an extensive search operation. American special agents from the FBI, 50 Dutch soldiers, and 3 specially equipped Dutch Air Force F-16 aircraft participated in the search. In addition to the ground search, divers searched the ocean for Natalee's body. Her remains were never found. On December 18, 2007, Aruban prosecutors announced that the case would be closed without charging anyone with a crime. The Aruban prosecutor's office reopened the case on February 1, 2008, after receiving video footage of Vandersloot under the influence of marijuana, saying that Natalee died on the morning of her disappearance, and that a friend had disposed of her body. He later denied that what he said was true in an interview, and said that he had sold Natalee into sexual slavery. He later retracted his comments. In January of 2012, Vandersloot was convicted of the May 30th, 2010 murder of 21-year-old Stephanie Flores Ramirez in Lima, Peru. At the request of Natalee's father, Alabama Judge Alan King declared Natalee legally dead on January 12, 2012. Natalee was the first of two children born to Dave and Elizabeth Holloway in Memphis, Tennessee. Her parents divorced in 1993, and she and her younger brother Matthew were raised by their mother. In 2000, Beth married George Twitty, a prominent Alabama businessman, and the family moved to Mountain Brook, Alabama. Natalee then graduated with honors in May of 2005 from Mountain Brook High School, located in a wealthy suburb of Birmingham. She was a member of the National Honor Society in the school dance squad, and she participated in other extracurricular activities. Natalee was scheduled to attend the University of Alabama on a full scholarship, where she had planned to pursue a pre-med track. At the time of his daughter's disappearance, Dave Holloway was an insurance agent for State Farm in Meridian, Mississippi, while Beth Twitty was employed by the Mountain Brook school system. On Thursday, May 26, 2005, Natalee and 124 of her fellow graduates arrived in Aruba for a 5-day unofficial graduation trip. The teenagers were accompanied by 7 chaperones. According to the teacher and chaperone Bob Plummer, the chaperones met with the students each day to make sure that everything was fine. Jody Berman, who organized the trip, stated, "The chaperones were not supposed to keep up with their every move." Police Commissioner Gerald Dompig, who had headed the investigation from mid-2005 until 2006, stated that the Mountain Brook students engaged in wild partying and lots of drinking, lots of room switching every night. "We know the Holiday Inn told them that they weren't welcome next year. Natalee, we know, she drank all day every day. We have statements she started every morning with cocktails. So much drinking that Natalee didn't show up for breakfast for 2 mornings. 2 of her classmates, Liz Kane and Claire Fireman, agreed that the drinking was kind of excessive." Natalee was last seen by her classmates around 1:30 a.m. on Monday, May 30th, as she was leaving the bar and nightclub Carlos and Charlie's. She left in a car with 17-year-old Johan Vandersloot, a Dutch honors student who was living in Aruba and attending the International School of Aruba, and his 2 Surinamese friends, brothers 21-year-old Deepak Kalop and 18-year-old Sadish. Holloway was scheduled to fly home later that day, but she did not appear for her return flight. Her packed luggage and her passport were found in her Holiday Inn hotel room. Aruban authorities initiated searches for Natalee throughout the island and surrounding waters, but did not find her. Immediately following Natalee's missed flight, her mother and stepfather flew with friends to Aruba by private jet. Within 4 hours of landing on the island, the Twitties presented the Aruban police with the name and address of Vandersloot, who was a person with whom Natalee left the nightclub. Beth stated that Vandersloot's full name was given to her by the night manager at the Holiday Inn, who supposedly recognized him on a videotape. The Twitties and their friends went to the Vandersloot home with 2 Aruban policemen to look for Natalee. He initially denied knowing Natalee's name, but he then told a story corroborated by Deepak Kalop, who was present in the house. Vandersloot related that they drove Natalee to the California lighthouse area of Arashi Beach because she wanted to see sharks. They later dropped Natalee off at her hotel around 2 a.m. According to Vandersloot, Natalee fell down as she exited the car but refused his help. He stated that as he and Kalop were driving away, Natalee was approached by a dark man in a black shirt, similar to those worn by security guards. The search and rescue efforts for Natalee began immediately. Hundreds of volunteers from Aruba and the United States joined in the effort. During the first days of the search, the Aruban government gave thousands of civil servants the day off to participate in the rescue effort. 50 Dutch Marines conducted an extensive search of the shoreline. Aruban banks raised $20,000 and provided other support to aid volunteer search teams. Beth Twitty was provided with housing initially at the Holiday Inn, where she coincidentally stayed in the same room that her daughter had occupied. She subsequently stayed at the presidential suite of the nearby Wyndham Hotel. Reports indicated that Natalee did not appear on any nighttime surveillance camera footage of the hotel lobby. However, Twitty has made varying statements as to whether the cameras were operational that night. According to an April 19, 2006 statement made by Twitty, the video cameras at the Holiday Inn were not functioning the night that Natalee vanished. Twitty had made other statements indicating that they were working and has stated so in her book. Police Commissioner Jan van der Straten, the initial head of the investigation until his 2005 retirement, said that Natalee did not have to go through the lobby to return to her room. The search for physical evidence was extensive and subject to occasional false leads. For example, a possible blood sample taken from Deepak Klop's car was tested but determined not to be blood. American law enforcement cooperated substantially with the Aruban authorities from the early days of the investigation. U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice stated to reporters that the United States was in constant contact with Aruban authorities. Another State Department official indicated substantial resources are being applied to this as they continue to ask for more. On June 5th, Aruban police detained Nick John and Abraham Jones, former security guards from the nearby Allegro Hotel, which was then closed for renovation, on suspicion of murder and kidnapping. Authorities have never officially disclosed the reason for their arrest, but according to the news outlets, statements made by Vandersloot and the Klopp brothers may have been a factor in their arrests. Reports also indicated that the two former guards were known for cruising hotels to pick up women, and at least one of them had a prior incident with law enforcement. John and Jones were released on June 13th without being charged. On June 9th, Vandersloot and the Klopp brothers were arrested on suspicion of the kidnapping and murder of Natalee. Aruban law allows for investigators to make an arrest based on serious suspicion. In order to continue holding the suspect in custody, an increasing evidential burden must be met at periodic reviews. According to Dompig, the focus of the investigation centered on these three suspects from the get-go. Dompig stated that close observation of the three men began 3 days after Natalee was reported missing, and the investigation included surveillance, telephone wiretaps, and even monitoring of their email. Dompig indicated that pressure from Natalee's family caused the police to prematurely stop their surveillance and detain the three suspects. As the investigation continued, David Cruz, spokesman for the Aruban Minister of Justice, falsely indicated on June 11th that Natalee was dead and that the authorities knew the location of her body. Cruz later retracted the statement, saying that he was a victim of misinformation. That evening, Dompig alleged to the Associated Press that one of the detained young men admitted something bad happened to Natalee after the suspects took her to the beach, and that the suspect was leading police to the scene. The next morning, prosecution spokeswoman Vivian Vanderbyzen refused to confirm or deny the allegation, simply stating that the investigation was at a very crucial, very important moment. On June 17th, a sixth person, later identified as disc jockey Steve Gregory Crows, was also arrested. Vanderstraten told the media that Crows was detained based on information from one of the other three detainees. On June 22nd, Aruban police detained Vandersloot's father, Paulus Vandersloot, for questioning. He was arrested that same day. Both Paulus and Crows were ordered to be released on June 26th. During this period, the suspects who had been detained changed their stories. All three indicated that Vandersloot and Natalee were dropped off at the Marriott Hotel Beach near the fishermen's huts. Vandersloot stated that he did not harm Natalee, but left her on the beach. According to Sadish Club's attorney, David Koch, Vandersloot called Deepak Club to tell the latter that he was walking home and sent him a text message 40 minutes later. At some time during the interrogation, Vandersloot detailed a third account that he was dropped off at home and Natalee was driven off by the Clopes brothers. Dompeg discounted the story, stating, "The latest story came when Vandersloot saw the other guys, the Clopes, were kind of finger pointing in his direction, and he wanted to screw them also by saying he was dropped off. But that story doesn't check out at all. He just wanted to screw Deepak." They had great arguments about this in front of the judge, because their stories didn't match. This girl, she was from Alabama. She's not going to stay in the car with two black kids. We believe the second story, that they were dropped off by the Marriott. Following the hearings before a judge, the Clope brothers were released on Monday, July 4th, but Vandersloot was detained for an additional 60 days. On July 4th, the Royal Netherlands Air Force deployed 3 F-16 aircraft, equipped with infrared sensors to aid in the search, but the results came up empty. In March 2006, it was reported that satellite photos were being compared with photographs taken more recently, presumably from the F-16s, in an attempt to find unexpected shifts of ground that might be Natalee's grave. After a local gardener came forward with information, a small pond near the Aruba Racket Club close to the Marriott Hotel Beach was partially drained between July 27th and 30th, 2005. According to Jug Twitty, the gardener claimed to have seen Vandersloot attempting to hide his face as he drove into the racket club with the Clope brothers on the very early morning of May 30th, between 2:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. Nancy Grace described the gardener as the man whose testimony cracks the case wide open. Another person, the jogger, claimed to have seen men burying a blonde-haired woman in a landfill during the afternoon of May 30th. The police had searched the landfill in the days following Natalee's disappearance. After the jogger's statements, the landfill was searched 3 more times. The FBI used cadaver dogs to assist in the recovery operation, but their searches were fruitless. Natalee's family initially offered $175,000 and donors offered $50,000 for her safe return. 2 months after her disappearance, the reward was increased from $200,000 to $1 million, with a $100,000 reward for information leading to the location of her remains. In August 2005, the reward for information leading to Natalee's corpse was increased from $100,000 to $250,000. The FBI announced that Aruban authorities had provided its agency with documents, suspect interviews, and other evidence. Investigators found a piece of duct tape with strands of blonde hair attached to it. The samples were tested at a Dutch lab. A group from the Aruban Police and Prosecutor's Office then traveled to the FBI Central Laboratory at Quantico, Virginia, to consult with the American investigators. Their hair samples were then tested a second time. The FBI announced that the hair samples did not belong to Natalee. The Clope brothers were then rearrested on August 26, along with another new suspect, 21-year-old Freddie Armbatisse. Freddie's lawyer said that his client was suspected of taking photographs of an underage girl and having inappropriate physical contact with the same girl. The incident allegedly occurred before the Natalee disappearance. Freddie's friends, Vandersloot and the Clope brothers, were supposedly involved in the incident. Vandersloot's mother, Anita, stated, "It's a desperate attempt to get the boys to talk, but there is nothing to talk about. While no public explanation was then made for the Kloep's rearrest, Dompig later said that it was an unsuccessful attempt to pressure the brothers into confessing. On September 3rd, the 4 detained suspects were released by a judge despite the attempts of the prosecution to keep them in custody. The suspects were released on the condition that they remain available to police. On September 14th, all restrictions on them were removed by the Combined Appeals Court of the Netherlands, Antilles, and Aruba. In the months following his release, Vandersloot gave several interviews that explained his version of events. The most notable interview was broadcast on Fox News over 3 nights in March of 2006. During the interview, Vandersloot indicated that Natalee wanted to have sex with him, but he did not because he didn't have a condom. He stated that Natalee wanted them to stay on the beach, but that he had to go to school in the morning. According to Vandersloot, he was picked up by Sadish Kloep at around 3 a.m. and left Natalee sitting on the beach. In August 2005, Kloep's attorney stated that his client had gone to sleep and had not returned to drive Vandersloot home. Vandersloot stated that he was somewhat ashamed to have left a young woman alone on the beach, albeit by her own request, and related that he was not truthful at first because he was convinced that Natalee would soon turn up. In January of 2006, the FBI and Aruban authorities interviewed, or in some cases re-interviewed, several of Natalee's classmates in Alabama. On January 17th, the Aruban police searched for Natalee's body in sand dunes on the northwest coast of Aruba, as well as areas close by the Marriott Beach. Additional searches took place in March and April 2006 without any result. Shortly before leaving the case, Dompig gave an interview to CBS in which he stated that he believed Natalee was not murdered, but probably died from alcohol and or drug poisoning, and that someone later hit her body. Dompig also stated that Aruba had spent about $3 million on the investigation, which was about 40% of the police operational budget. Dompig indicated that there was evidence that pointed to possession, though not necessarily use, of illicit drugs by Natalee. Members of the Holloway family have denied that she used drugs. On April 11, 2006, Dave Holloway published a book co-authored with R. Stephanie Good and Larry Garrison called Aruba, the tragic untold story of Natalee Holloway and corruption in paradise, that recounted the search for his daughter. On January 31, 2008, Dutch crime reporter Peter R. de Vries claimed that he had solved the Holloway case. De Vries stated that he would tell all on a special television program on Dutch TV on February 3rd. On February 1st, the Dutch media reported that Vandersloot made a confession regarding Natalee's disappearance. Later that day, Vandersloot stated that he was telling the individual what he wanted to hear, and denied any involvement in her disappearance. That same day, the Aruba prosecutor's office announced the reopening of the case. The broadcast aired on February 3, 2008, and it included excerpts from footage recorded from hidden cameras and microphones in the vehicle of Patrick Vanderim, a Dutch businessman and ex-convict who gained Vandersloot's confidence. Vandersloot was seen smoking marijuana and stating that he was with Natalee when she began convulsively shaking and then became unresponsive. He also stated that he attempted to revive her without success. He said that he called a friend who told Vandersloot to go home and who disposed of the body. An individual reputed to be his friend, identified in the broadcast as Dory, has denied Vandersloot's account, indicating that he was then in Rotterdam at school. The Aruban prosecutor's office attempted to obtain an arrest warrant for Vandersloot based on the tapes. However, a judge denied the request. The prosecutor appealed the denial, but the appeal failed on February 14th. The appeals court held that the statements on the tape were inconsistent with the evidence in the case and were insufficient to hold Vandersloot. On February 8th, Vandersloot met with Aruban investigators in the Netherlands and denied that what he had said on the tape was true, stating that he was under the influence of marijuana at the time. Vandersloot indicated that he still maintains that he left Natalee on the beach. In March 2008, news reports indicated that Vanderim was secretly taped after giving an interview for Aruban television. Vanderim, under the impression that the cameras had been turned off, disclosed that he had been a friend of Vandersloot for years, contradicting his statement on De Vries' show that he had met Vandersloot in 2007, that he expected to become a millionaire through his involvement in the Holloway case, and that he knew the person who supposedly disposed of Natalee's body, and that Vandersloot had asked him for 2,000 euros to buy the man's silence. According to Dutch news service ANP, Vanderim, who had already signed a book deal, was furious after learning of the taping and threatened the interviewer who sought legal advice. Vanderim's book, Overboard, co-written with E.E. Byers, was released in Dutch on June 25th. Vanderim was arrested on December 13th in the Netherlands for allegedly hitting his girlfriend with a crowbar and engaging in risky driving behavior while fleeing police. The De Vries broadcast was discussed in a seminar by Dutch legal psychologist William Albert Wagner, who indicated that the statements did not constitute a confession. Wagner criticized De Vries for broadcasting the material, stating that the broadcast made it harder to obtain a conviction, and had De Vries turned over the material to the authorities without broadcasting it, they would have held all the trumps in questioning Vandersloot. Wagner opined that not only was the case not solved, it was not even clear that a crime had been committed. Professor Brantz in the same seminar also criticized De Vries' methods. On November 24th, Fox News aired an interview with Vandersloot in which he alleged that he sold Natalee into sexual slavery, receiving money both when Natalee was taken and later on to keep quiet. Vandersloot also alleged that his father paid off 2 police officers who had learned that Natalee was taken to Venezuela. Vandersloot later retracted the statements made in the interview. Fox News also aired part of an audio recording provided by Vandersloot, which he alleged is a phone conversation between him and his father, in which the father displays knowledge of his son's purported involvement in human trafficking. According to Moes, the voice heard on the recording is not that of Paulus Vandersloot. The Dutch newspaper reported that the father's voice is almost certainly that of Joran Vandersloot himself, trying to speak in a lower tone. Paulus died of a heart attack on February 10, 2010. On March 20, 2009, Dave Holloway transported a search dog to Aruba to search a small reservoir in the northern part of the island. The reservoir was previously identified by a supposed witness as a possible location of Natalee's remains. Aruban authorities indicated that they had no new information in the case, but that Holloway had been given permission to conduct a search. On February 23, 2010, it was reported that Vandersloot had stated in an interview, first offered to RTL Group in 2009, that he had disposed of Natalee's body in a marsh in Aruba. New Chief Prosecutor Peter Blanken indicated that authorities had investigated the latest story and had dismissed it. Blanken stated that the locations, names, and times he gave just did not make sense. In March 2010, underwater searches were conducted by Aruban authorities after an American couple reported that they were snorkeling when they photographed what they thought might be human skeletal remains. possibly those of Natalee. The Aruban authorities then sent divers to investigate, but no remains were ever recovered. In June 2011, 6 years after Natalee's disappearance, Dave Holloway filed a petition with the Alabama courts to have his daughter declared legally dead. The papers were served on his ex-wife, Beth Twitty, who announced her intention to oppose the petition. A hearing was then held on September 23, 2011, at which time probate judge Alan King ruled that Dave Holloway had met the requirements for a legal presumption of death. On January 12, 2012, a second hearing was held, after which Judge King signed the order declaring Natalee Holloway to be legally dead. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to have a family member go missing like that and never be found, or finding out exactly what happened to them. At the end of the day, everyone would want to know, even if it was something horrible, just to get that closure and try to move on with their life. But I have no doubt in my mind that the Vandersloot and the other two brothers are definitely involved, whether they killed her or if they sold her into human sex trafficking. They're guilty and they got away with it. Such a shame. And now, on to our next story, which comes from yourghoststories.com. There are times when all of us have passed through a gauntlet of trial and tribulation. We have become discouraged, brokenhearted, or not only disappointed in life, but have peered beyond the precipice of despair to slip and fall into its depths. I am fortunate to have had an experience that confirms, despite horrors in life, that good, purpose, and order do exist in the universe. This is an odd story. It involves my mother, brother, and myself. It also involves a protective agent, some say an angel, a spirit of a loved one who has passed on, or coincidentally a human possessing omniscience regarding place, time, and the ability to read the minds of young children with the moral fortitude to act upon this knowledge. It's still a mystery to me. My mother, at the request of family and friends, has begun writing her life story, as well as accounts of her spiritual journey on the Christian path. The following is her account. I want to tell you a true story about my two little kids, who set out one dark night to find their mother. Two boys, one around 5 and a half, and his little brother around 3 and a half. I had wanted to go to church one Sunday night, and because the boys were very young, I had decided to hire a babysitter so that I could go to church and take in the service without distractions. The girl that I had hired lived next door and was 16, and her parents were home in case she had any problems. As I did not drive in those days, I got a ride to church that Sunday night service that had started at 7 p.m. Towards the end of the service, it must have been around 8:30, someone came and got me as I had been praying at the altar and said, "Your children are at the door of the church." I looked at them completely shocked and said, "That can't be. They are home, most likely in bed by now." They insisted that I come to the back of the church and see for myself. The church had some stairs that went down to the front door, and there, standing at the foot of the stairs, were my two little boys, who had dirty faces, dirty clothes, noses running, and I was in complete shock. As I saw this, my mind could not perceive it as reality. Why were they here? What happened? I ran down the stairs and hysterically said to my oldest boy, "How did you get here? What are you doing here?" My oldest boy said that he wanted to find his mommy, so he grabbed his brother's hand and set out to do just that. Because I very rarely ever went anywhere without the kids, they were not used to being watched by the babysitter. So they snuck out of the house and they took off down the dark road to find their mom. We lived about 5 miles from the church, and down at the end of our road was a large area that was leading up to a hill and in those days there were very little housing in our Washington neighborhood, just a lot of woods and darkness. My oldest son said that they were walking along this dark road, and a car drove up, and a man asked them where they were going. He replied, "To church to find my mommy." The boys did not know where the church was, just said that their mom was at church. By the way, my son said it was a white car, and he did not remember what the man looked like. He said that the man just said to get in, "I will take you to your mom." So in the car they went, and they drove right up to the doors of the church. He said that the man said to go up to the steps and open the door, and then they would find their mother. My son said that the man never spoke to them other than to tell them that they would be all right, and he would make sure that they found their mom. Since the youngest boy was too young to tell much, he just smiled and wiped his nose. So here I stood with my mouth open, and I could not even think about the danger that my two little boys had been in. I, of course, asked the person who took me to see the boys back home and to try to find out what exactly had happened. When we got home, the people next door were frantic and had called the police. However, as yet, they had not shown up. In those days, living out in a rural area before the days of cell phones, the response of officials was very slow. Our babysitter noticed right away that the boys were gone and started looking with the help of her parents, and that they were all frantic and upset. So when we drove up with the two kids, the mother of the babysitter started immediately cussing me out because she was so very upset about the situation. The officials were then notified that the children were safe and at home. After much discussion, all of us went back to our homes. We never found out who it was that had picked them up. I sat down and I began to think about what had happened. What person in their right mind would pick up two small boys in the dark, take them to a church where the children themselves had no idea where it was? End of my mother's account. I'm the 3.5-year-old little brother in the account and was too young to remember this incident. My late brother, however, recalled it vividly. He told me of this event several times when we had late-night chats. He recounted that several times during the drive, he tried to see the face of the man who drove us. The man always just managed to have his face averted or shadowed. This happened in the 60s. We were just ordinary children. We grew up to have ordinary lives. I wish that I could remember. Despite the darkness and despair, I've lived long enough to know that mystery, beauty, and love continue to exist outside of ourselves. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. I truly hope that everyone enjoyed the stories. If you did, could you please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts? A 5-star rating really does help others to find us. Don't forget to share with any friends and family that enjoyed this kind of content. Also, come join us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube. If you do enjoy the podcast and you'd like to help support the show, subscribe on Patreon and get instant access to monthly bonus episodes starting from the $5 tier. Once again, thank you all for listening, and make sure to keep those doors and windows locked, and stay ready for Ohio Unsolved.